Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast,
where we inspire fathers to build the blueprint for the next generation.
We are the Thomas Brothers. I'm Jared.
And I'm Ethan.
All right, so welcome again. We're starting, we're continuing our conversation about our stages of fatherhood. Today we're going to cover 3 stages in quick succession. The guide stage, so basically 13 to 19, to when these kids are out of the house, hopefully. That mentor stage, which is really 20 and up, and then kind of a final partial stage is a grandfather stage. So we're going to cover these and talk about some pros, talk about some cons, talk about some... when I am in these situations, I will, or I would like to. So let's get started, Ethan. Let's have you start off with the guide stage. What are some of your thoughts on this stage?
Yeah. So both Jared and I, we have not yet reached this stage. We're kind of on the precipice of this stage, right? With 10-year-olds, soon to be 11-year-olds this year, and this age I'm excited for, right? I feel like this is kind of the age where kids, like, they start to being able to, like, keep up with you.
Yeah.
You know, we went down to, so my son is 11. No, he turns 11 in April. So he's 10 right now. But we went down to Florida this past year. And one of my sisters lives in kind of southern Florida area, and we went to the beach, and the water was just like crystal clear blue, and we had brought a bunch of snorkel gear, and we were kind of snorkeling around the area around the beach. You know, it was maybe 3-5 feet deep, and you know, stuff like that, and you could easily kind of come back to where you could stand. But there was some buoys that were about 100 yards out into the ocean, and there was 3 buoys set up, and there was like some snorkeling area, right? There was like a little, maybe like a sunken ship thing that was out there. And my sister and I and her older boys were like, oh, well, we're gonna swim out there, who were like, 16 and 14 or something like that. And my 10-year-old was like, oh, I want to go. And was like, okay, all right, bud, do you think you can keep up? And he was like, oh, yeah, he does swim team and everything. And so we put on our masks and snorkels, and we started swimming out there. And we didn't have any life jackets or anything. We were just kind of swimming. An easy 20 feet deep, but it was like crystal clear, and, sandy bottom. And so we swam all the way out there, like 100 yards, and then we swam like up and down a little bit. And man, he kept right there with me the whole time. I mean, I was swimming, and I kept looking back, and you okay, you okay? And he was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And there was one point where he did get a little bit tired, and he kind of, I was treading water, and he kind of put his hand on me, or I put my hand on him to kind of just ease him a little bit, to let him catch his breath. But I mean, he did super well. And then I wanted to go a little bit further, and him and my sister and one of their other boys were like, oh, we're tired, we're going to go back. And I was like, all right, head on back. And so, but it was just really cool, because I was cautious, right? But he was at a point to where, like, I wasn't worried about him. Yeah. It was like, oh, I know he can do this. Like, I know he can do it. And that was a really cool feeling. And I feel like this kind of guide stage of this, 13, 14, 15, 16 up to 19, they really get to that stage where, man, there comes a point, a couple of years, where he's probably going to be able to outswim me, or he's going to be able to run faster than I can. There's this family on social media that my wife watches, but the husband every year for the kids' birthdays is he does like a race, like a foot race across the yard, which is, I don't know, maybe like 30 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
And just to show, like, every year he does that with each one of his kids. And I think his oldest is like 15 or something like that, and he's like super close to losing to his oldest son. And so it's just kind of funny, like you go through the years and see all of these races throughout the years, and it's just like, oh man, when are you gonna pass up and actually beat dad? Um, so
That's funny.
it was
Yeah.
just, yeah, it was just kind of cool. As I'm thinking towards this stage, um, and I guess a couple of the things to maybe, I don't know, like what watch out for is I feel like this is the stage where you kind of lose a lot of that control. Kids start driving and working and doing stuff and having interactions when I'm not there with their friends, with girls, with like hopefully you have taught them well enough to be able to act right in given situations. Um, you know, and
Yeah.
so yeah, that's just kind of
No,
some of the beginning things that I had been thinking about.
yeah, totally. No, I think that's really good. I think that part of it is that there's that growing independence. What you talked about is that and there's self discovery. I think self discovery is such an important piece that you're providing your kids with opportunities to discover what they like and learn and explore this world. One of the cool things that I did growing up, and I think my parents did for me, is that I think scouting did a lot of that. It helped me. Really, you get into main bulk of scouting between the ages of 12 and 18. But there was a cool thing when I got my Eagle Scout at 15, or yeah, I think it was late 15. There was I wanted to be a movie director. I was really interested in movies, and they did this cool thing where they hooked me. They connected me with a film director, like a local director of movies, and he took me out to dinner, and I got to ask him a bunch of questions, and then we had this Eagle banquet thing that he sat next to me, and we kept talking and stuff like that. And that was really cool, just to meet him and get those different kind of experiences. And so as a parent, I think it's important to help foster that in your kids and help them discover what they like or what path they want to take, because their road is different than your road as that you have taken. And so I think that's one. Another thing is it's so important to really build independent men. And by that, what I mean is you need to give your kid opportunities, start giving them responsibilities and opportunities to really be independent. They need to know how to apply for a job. They need to know how to cook for themselves. They need to know how to cook a meal. They need to know how to set a table. They need to know table manners. They need to know social cues. You're about to send them out into the world, so you need to start teaching them. They need to know how to change wiper blades or tires on a car, or maybe even the oil in the car. There's a big debate on social media whether you should change your own oil or you should go get it done. And some guys are their dad steps into the car and opens the glove box. He's like, "What's this, son?" It's a receipt for an oil change. He's like, "I'm sorry, I just didn't have time to do it myself." So but these kind of things or how to make how to schedule a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment, how to budget. These life skills that you need are just critical for, especially I think a mother and a father to teach their kid. I suck at cooking. I mean, I could make a mean grilled cheese sandwich, but I'm not very good at cooking. Probably because I've been married to my wife for nearly 15 years, and she's an excellent cook, and I've largely leaned on her and most of the cooking. But being able to have those skill sets. When our boys leave their home, we will have them. My wife and I will have them able to make a variety of meals. Even now, they can make their own Easy Mac. They can make their own bagels in the morning. They can make their own, whatever. So that's really good. And I think that another thing is that in this stage, 13 to 19, this is the teen years, is to give them grace and to allow for mistakes. I I think sometimes parents are extremely strict with their children, and they don't allow that space. I mean, their child is becoming an adult, and they're experimenting with life, and within a certain boundary set. I mean, if they're experimenting with heroin or fentanyl, obviously, step in or well before that. But, if your kid is, just trying to figure things out, or they make a couple missteps here and there, that's okay. I think it's important that you not wield like shame as a weapon against your child for trying to figure out life. I think that, especially public shame, I think it can be damaging to a child, especially when they're just trying to figure life out, and they're going through a lot of hormonal changes too, and so give them give them the grace you wish you had been afforded when you were a teenager, and I think that will likely go a long way. So those are some of my thoughts on the guide stage. Anything else you would add on that, Ethan?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's all great advice. One other thing I was kind of thinking through with this stage is that um, this is a stage where a lot of pivotal kind of life choices will be made, maybe like directional choices to a certain extent, or at least the foundation for those decisions will be made. Uh, like, for example, help to guide them to successful endeavors, right? This is kind of the age, 18, they're graduating high school, thinking about going to college, maybe, maybe going to start exploring careers and things like that. Um, when, for example, like the career, when they look for a career to study, like help them research those careers. I mean, help them investigate go through the options that they have, like review through different career opportunities, potential salaries, and different streams of income and benefits and things like that. Like, um, we have such a good opportunity as parents, maybe even something that our parents didn't have access to, with how powerful the internet is and just our access to data and information and videos and YouTube. I mean, you could just what is it like to be a civil engineer? You go to YouTube and freaking get like thousands of videos on what people thought, or even like, going to a certain school and different things like that. Like there's so much information that I think sometimes in that time period, at least when I was kind of going through it, you're kind of overwhelmed by, you know, just life, and you're still really young. And then a lot of kids end up going to college and they're like, oh, I'm going to be a poli sci major and take out $100,000 worth of debt going to an out of school college, or I mean, an out of state college,
Yeah.
and then they graduate with a 4 year degree, $150,000 in debt, and then they can't get a job in that major, and so they're working at a call center for 50 grand a year, and it's just like, crippling student loan debt.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying as a parent, like, oh, you have to pay for their college and do this and do that or whatever. But I think as a parent, like there can be maybe some more involved guidance in like, hey, I know this is what you want to do. Maybe you want to be a poli sci major. That's fine. But let's go in and let's research the top 25 jobs that these majors get. Okay. And then you go through and you're like, oh, okay, yeah. And then let's look at the salaries for each one of those jobs. Oh, salary ranges. And then they see the salary range and they're like, oh, well, that doesn't seem very good. It's like, oh, well, okay. So there's different ways to like convince. And I'm not saying it's all about money or whatever else, but you know, as adults, you can influence those types of decisions just by providing a little bit of information. So,
Yeah, totally.
that was just kind of something that impacted me. That maybe I wish I would have had a little bit more access to information, or you know done some more research or been pointed towards research. It was just kind of like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I don't know. I want to maybe do this. Okay. And
Yeah.
so, I think, all of us kids had pretty strong foundations in kind of what we wanted to do, or at least capabilities. Um, and so maybe it wasn't a big concern to our parents because they felt that we were, going to be successful in whatever we did. But that's just something I want to, utilize the access to information that I have for my kids.
Yeah. Oh, that's very good. I agree with that. There's so much more information nowadays, way more than was available when we were kids, and so there's a lot more opportunities. I mean, like, heck, there's opportunities where my kids are like, "Hey, Dad, I want to do like coding," and like, okay, well, they found a YouTuber who has all these Python codes who they can go in and they can create the Mario video game, or they can create, Space Invaders or whatever. And my son has been able to make these video games. The thing is, like, at his school, the teachers will like ban all these websites that have video games on them. So my son's like, I want to make. He made like a Google website with games on it. He built games on it. He like copied code over from like if you go in, you click on a website, you like
Yeah.
inspect element, and you go and you can copy that code. He like pasted it on this Google Drive so his buddies can access it at school, so they can play games. Uh, but like, there's so much more now that you could really dive into almost anything, and so that's really cool. So helping steer that and helping guide that interest. A kid doesn't know. There's a thing called Code Academy, that he can do. There's lots of different things. So a child might say, I have interest in this, and then it's the parent's responsibility to say, okay, well, how can we explore that, or how can we, see if that's something you're really interested in, and let's try more of that. So
Yeah,
it's a lot
for
more
sure.
now than it was. So let's go to the next one. This is the mentor stage. So this is after you're, a 20-year-old. You're now maybe out of the house as a, as a parent, maybe an empty nester. What would an empty nester? How should they act towards their child? What do you think, Ethan?
Yeah. So I guess, so this is the stage of, 20, it says 20 plus. And then the next stage is the grandfather stage. So maybe this is kind of like, I guess, the space between 20 years old and then when your kids have kids.
Well, I think this is. I think it's a little bit of a. Well,
Or
I
maybe
think
there's a
being
mix.
I think it is both, because I think one, they're a mentor to you throughout your whole life, but the
Yeah, that's true.
grandparent stage is more for the grandkids,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
and
So
and it involves you too.
so my one thing that I kind of did like rose thorn and then a story for each one of these, but my kind of good thing, my rose was, I feel like this is really the stage where you kind of see your kids, um, I don't want to say like thrive, right? You really get to like see the fruits of your labors as a parent, and maybe that's very selfish and egotistical, but I mean, maybe not. You get to see like, hey, your kids are developing in their careers, and they're blossoming in their interests, and um they're potentially a spouse, and then their own kids, and um it's just really, I feel like this is going to be a cool stage to just see that development where you can just sit back, and maybe you're not so much kind of responsible for their actions anymore. It's more of hopefully you start to see that the trajectory of their life, and hopefully you have built a solid blueprint for this next generation, right? And that
Hmm.
they can follow that, and hopefully have some self positive experience. That was something that I was just kind of like, yeah, that's going to be cool to kind of see the flourish. I mean, I guess I could go the opposite way, and I guess you could see a kid like destroy their life and potential by making very poor decisions um, in this age range. But I think that, I guess that goes for any age range. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this one specifically, it's like, hey, you're responsible for your own actions, and Daddy can't come to save you anymore.
Yeah. I think it's like a delicate balance of loving your child no matter what. I mean, sometimes those disagreements are where the child goes awry. Maybe the child um, simply deciding to move to another state. Maybe that just absolutely breaks you or whatever. And so I think it's important that you've launched these kids into the world and let them live their life, and then be there as a helper or a mentor whenever they need that help. And I think that one of the critical pieces is like be there in a non-judgmental way so that they can come to you for advice. No one's going to come to you for advice if they're afraid of being judged. Say, hey, Dad, I'm having problems with my car, and I want to know what I should do. Well, I told you never to buy that car, and why'd you do this, and what? It's just like, bro, are you gonna help me or not? So like, I was just like a random example, but like, or like, hey, I'm having, um, I'm trying to figure this thing out at work, and have you ever had this dynamic in your life, or how should I navigate this? Like, just I think being there to help and like being like, hey, I'm always on your side. I'm always here to help you. I'm always in your corner. I'm never going to be in the other person's corner. I'm always going to be in your corner. I think that's the type of relationship I'd like to have with my kids. Encourage their healthy pursuits. Obviously, if they're like picking up cigarette smoking or doing something that's destructive to their lives, that is a little bit different. But sometimes they might pursue things that you don't understand or that you're not interested in, or hobbies that you just are like, why? I don't understand why my son is interested in, RC racing cars or whatever, or I don't understand why he wants to collect
Because they're
baseball
awesome.
cards. Yeah. So, or, so they're just like different things. And so celebrating them in their pursuits, celebrating their milestones is also important. Hey, you got a job, or you've gotten married, or I think that's a huge one. I think for this stage, one of the biggest things is that when your child gets married, I think welcoming the son or daughter-in-law, in my case, I'm going to have all daughter-in-laws, into the family is critically important. That because when your child gets married, they left their father and mother and they're cleaving unto their spouse, right? So they are now part of a new family, and your involvement in that new unit of family is directly proportional to how you treat the second part of that family, that second new family member. And so I think that is incredibly important, and that's something that will be one of my top priorities, because I hope to maintain a great relationship with my sons, and so in that is like when they get married, that means the unit of their marriage. Like I want to maintain a great relationship with the unit of their marriage, which includes their spouse. So that includes celebrating their spouse's milestones, celebrating their spouse's achievements, and not just my own. Because if it becomes ours and theirs, that's just it's divisive. And then your son, like in my case, my son would be, if he gets married, he's living with his wife, and that is his world, him and his wife. And so if I was to somehow make it, well, you're mine, but she's not mine. That's that's not how I want him to view his marriage or him to view his family. So it just creates a different dynamic. So that's something that I think is really important in the mentor stage, is accepting new family members into the fold, and as they launch into their new units, the new family units. Because I want my kids to get married. I want my kids to have their own families, and so I can't be mad when they do that or upset that it's not the way that I would have done it. So
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote down here. It seems like one of the hardest things, that might be the hardest things as a parent of this kind of age group, is I'm sure like seeing from a higher level view of what's going on, and able to maybe predict the outcome of some of their decisions, um, and wanting to give advice like don't do that or do that or don't do that, but they don't have to take it. And a lot of times you probably shouldn't give it, um, because maybe they don't want it. Um, and it might be because they feel it's going to come from a judgmental place, like you had talked about, Jared, or um, so I don't know, learn how to give advice through maybe example, or and giving them advice in ways that is not overbearing, but that seems like comes from a place of love. And I think a foundation of that is built from a young age. I don't think that it just, in their 20s you're like, "Oh, I'm going to figure out how to give them advice from love." It's like, but it's come from not that for their whole life.
yeah,
I feel like if maybe you did things right, then I don't know, your kids will come to you at this age and be like, "Oh man, what do you think I should do, Dad?" Or "What do you think this?" and "What do you think that?" I guess that would be like a huge win as a parent. But
yeah, yeah,
times have really changed since like with the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s when we grew up. I just feel like times are much different than they were. Human nature, I don't think, is very different than it was. Um, but as a parent, I think it's like you had said, Jared, it's important to keep up with the times. I think that it's important to keep up with the times, anything from like technology to music to just like what's happening in the world. I think all that stuff is important because it's a way to connect and it's a way to stay connected. I Caitlin and I started this TV show. It's called A Man on the Inside, and it has the dad from Getting Even with Dad, Ted Danson,
okay,
and he's like older now, right? He's probably in his 80s, maybe, or maybe his like late 70s, or he's older. Um, and basically the whole premise of this movie is there's this like upper scale nursing home, kind of retirement facility in California, that there has been kind of a string of thefts in the facility, and some high priced jewelry items have gone missing. And so they hire this private investigator secretly to investigate these thefts in the nursing home. Well, the private investigator's like, "Well, how am I gonna do this?" And so they're like, "We need an old guy to like infiltrate this nursing home and kind of do some investigation work for us." So they put out an ad in the newspaper, because they're like, no old guys could be looking at Facebook or Craigslist or whatever else. So they put out an ad in the newspaper, and all these old guys show up. And this guy, Ted Danson, and he reads the newspaper every day. And so he sees this ad and he's like, "Oh, this is interesting." So he goes there, and it's like this private investigator lady is interviewing all of these old guys to see if they could do it. And she's like, the whole interview was, pull out your phone, take a picture of the wall, and text it to me. Here's my phone number. Right. And it was, and the guys were like, "Well, how do I do this?" And it was just like all these like older boomers trying to figure out like how
oh
do you how to use
gosh,
a phone, how to do whatever. And then he goes in there and he sits down, and he is has an iPhone or whatever, and she's like, "Hey, take a picture of the wall and text it to me. Here's my phone number." And he's just talking to her, and he pulls out his phone and he does it and texts it and send it to her. And her phone goes off, and she's like, "Did you just send me this text?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, you asked me to." And she's like, "You're hired." Right, like on the spot. And so it's funny. It's like super funny. It's a comedy. And so he goes in and infiltrates into this nursing home and tries to like solve the mystery. But it's just like things like that, right? Learn
Yeah.
how to download the PDF, or like just keep up with the times, keep up with the technology. I know it's not super easy, but just something I think would help to keep that connection.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. It's well, I think that the era that we grew up in was so much change. I
Yeah.
mean, it went from
It was probably hard to keep up with.
no internet days to what we have now. I mean, it's unbelievable. From the early '90s to now, it's like a whole world of difference. And so I can't imagine what it will be like, um, in another 20 years or 30 years. But
Yeah.
hopefully we can keep pace.
I hope so. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
So the last, any other thoughts about
No,
the
no,
mentor
that was
stage?
it on that one.
Um, so going on to the last stage this is when you become a grandparent or a grandfather in our case, as we would have our children would have kids. So when I think about being a grandpa, I think about like, uh, you ask anybody like, what do you want? What do you want to happen when you die? What would you say you want to happen when you die?
Um, that everyone that I love knows that I love them and that I cared, and that hopefully I could.
Well, let's say when everybody dies. Let's say 100 years from now or 200 years from now. What where do you want to be? Where do you want your spirit to be or whatever?
I mean, hopefully, my family will all want to be together.
Right? That's what I'm saying. So that's me too. Like whenever I die and all my kids die and my wife dies, I would like to see them again. And so that is what I feel like the grandparent stage is. It's like, why do I need to die to do that? So I feel like as a grandparent, you have the opportunity where oftentimes you're retired. And what do you want to do with your life? Like, I want to spend it with the people that are the most important to me. And that's, my wife and my kids uh, and their families. And then obviously, and then as like the circle will like ripple out after that, like extended family and so forth. And so when I think about that is like if I want something, if I want to be with my family when I die, like why wouldn't I want to be with them now, right? Right? Why wouldn't I want to go help them and be around? You are either a grandfather or a grandmother. So part of that is that you are a father or a mother, and this is like you've been given this second title. Now you can either choose to accept that title and continue forward, or you can and step up to the plate and be that grandfather or grandmother, or you could just casually, oh well, I didn't accept that title. I was just given that because my kid had a kid. So I think there's different approaches to how you approach, or different approaches to how you grab life by the horns or that responsibility by the horns. In many ways, it's a second opportunity to pass on your legacy to the next generation. There's so many unique opportunities to serve as a grandparent, and also to serve your children. Your children are in the weeds of parenting, and if anybody knows what it's like to be there, it's when my kids are when they have their children, I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what it's like to have to have these kids running around the house. I know how much you need a break. let me come watch the kid, watch the kids once a month, or bring the kids over for a sleepover, and or let you guys go on a trip. Uh, let's arrange that because I know that break is so critical, and heck, to pay someone to watch your kids for a long weekend is $500 or whatever, and if you've got you know kids, it's very expensive, and so I think it's important to be there and be supporting. At least I want to be there, supporting my kids and helping them create, amplify their efforts as parents. So if my son says, "Dad, one of the things I want to do with my kids is I want to really teach them coding. I really think that coding is so important, and I know you did that a little bit with me, and I'm putting my kids in this class." And so it's like, okay, well, how can I help amplify that effort? Can I, I found this coding camp. Have you considered this? Or can I pay for your kid to go coding camp? Or can I get this program for your son? Or these different things. Just like, how can I help the parents be more and amplify those efforts? I have some additional thoughts, but I want to hear what some of your thoughts are first.
Yeah. This seems like a million miles away, but I mean, could into 15 years and we'd be grandparents. You and I.
Say that one more time. You cut out just a little bit.
It seems really far away, but it
Yep.
could be just like 10 to 15 years before you and I are grandparents.
Yeah.
And so that's just interesting, and we're having this conversation now, but it's not that far away. I mean, yeah, closer probably will come much faster than we anticipate. Or at least it'll seem like it. From a grandparent stage, I think that it seems like you can enjoy the grandkids without the responsibility of their constant well-being. Um, you can maybe more enjoy them without, I don't want to say without responsibility because you have responsibility, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like you don't have the same stresses as the parent, um, and that they're going through. But those stresses because you've been there, obviously. I think I have examples of grandparents with our own grandparents, with different parents that my or grandparents that my kids have in their lives. Some live closer, some live further away. Um, and there's some things that some of the grandparents do that I'm like, oh, I really like that. And then there's some things that different grandparents do that I'm like, oh, I like that. And then there's some things that both of them do that I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to do it that same way when I'm a grandparent, which is fine. Um, but I guess I kind of broke it down into two things. Uh, for being a grandparent, right? On how you can support your grandkids. And those two things are, well, first off, a caveat that I will say that as the number of grandchildren you have increases, that it probably is a little bit more difficult um, to make time for everyone, um, or at least equally make equal time for everyone. That sounds miserable trying to track and do all that, right? But it's got to come from the heart. So that's one caveat. But the two things that I think are how grandparents could support their grandchildren is first is time. So love and love through. Well, let me break it down. This love their grandkids, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can our grandparents love their grandkids, right? Or how can that happen? I think there's several different ways. So one is time, like I said, spending time. One is supporting their interests, and so if they're, even if their interests are different than something you're interested in,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Supporting their interests. And then the third one is showing up. That kind of is related to time, but I think it's a little bit different, right? Showing up in times um, when support is a big thing. You know, we talked about this in a couple other of um, I think in the maybe the second episode that of this stages of fatherhood, that just showing up and being present at different things and life events and challenges or whatever it is that a child is going through or doing, being present, being in the audience is huge. Showing up is big. So love your grandkids with time, supporting their interests, and showing up. So that was one. That's one way they can support their grandkids. The second way, I think, is supporting their children, their own children, in the raising of these grandkids. So, Jared, you kind of alluded to some of these. Anyone that has been a parent knows the stresses of being a parent and that all that is included with that, whether it's financial struggles, not being able to spend time alone with your spouse and build that relationship. Um, uh, you know, I think that's important. And then actually, this is where I put in something that you talked about earlier, Jared, as um, in our case, understanding, you and I's case, we both live close to our parents. We both live, 20 minutes away from our parents, which is awesome. And we get to live close to each other too. But also understanding that in living in our situations and living close to our parents, mom and dad, our spouses are living states and states and states away from their parents, which can be challenging for them. And so just kind of having that understanding and not taking that for granted. I'm not saying it is taken for granted. I'm just saying um, the realization that, we only get to see other grandparents once or twice a year, maybe. Um, so those are some ways that the children in raising grandkids. And the last one is not judging how we raise our kids, but loving them for who they are and where they are.
Yeah.
We all have our own thoughts, our own experiences, our own individual partners that we've decided to create a family with. And I think all of that needs to be taken into account and considered when we are raising our own kids. And I'm saying taken into account and considered by the grandparents is that some of the decisions that I make, that my wife and I make. When I say I mean my wife and I as a partnership in raising
Yeah.
our kids. They might not be the same decisions that you would make. Um, and so try not to judge by those decisions, but just love through them, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the two major things. Loving the
That takes,
grandkids through the
yeah.
ways I said, and then supporting the kids, your children in raising your grandkids.
Yeah, I mean, that last one you talked about, that takes humility. The thing is that we're growing up, I mean, so as children of my parents, I know better than anybody if their parenting method worked, right? Right? I would know better than they would if it worked, right? I am the
Because of how you feel, or
because of
you
how
see
I
life,
feel,
or
because of how my experience, because the entire thing about parenting is how is the experience, you're shaping the experience of the child. So as the child is an adult now, they know what that parenting method, the pros and the cons of that parenting method. And they, hopefully, what I do is that I want to pick the good things out of that I liked, continue those, and then the things that I didn't like, I'm going to leave by the wayside. And also, some of the things I need to adapt because we're in a different era. Things are there's different challenges that kids face nowadays than they did when I was a kid. And so there's, like you said earlier, there's more information out there. We're more aware of a lot more things than when I was a kid, And so that is exactly like, so for a grandparent to be like, oh, well, you're not doing exactly what I would do. It's like, well, who told you that you were the model thing? And it's like, you know that you raised me, right? Like, I know what you did wrong. Or I know where you misstepped, and I'm trying to do it differently with my kids. And I'm sure that they're trying to do it differently than their kids. Here's a clear example, and this is something that I find very admirable. My wife's dad, he grew up in a very, very abusive home. Very abusive home. His father was it was just ultimately not a good man. And he would hit his sons often. He was very selfish, very physically abusive to not only his boys, but his wife. And my father-in-law broke that chain, and he broke that history of violence. And even my grandfather's father was abusive, and my wife's dad never hit any of his kids. He wasn't a physically abusive father, and he broke that chain of abuse because he wanted something better for his kids than what his father was able to give him. And just like I hope that my kids will give me some grace in the deficiencies that I've had, and they'll do it hopefully better than I was able to do it as being a father.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that, we look at our parents and we're like, hey, we're going to try to take the good things that we liked, and then we're going to maybe leave some of the other things by the wayside. And that might seem harsh, and like we're like, oh, our parents were whatever. But I want my kids to do the same thing. I want my kids to take the good stuff and maybe leave some of those bad things. And then can you imagine 10 generations down the line if everybody does that, takes the good things and leaves behind the bad things? I think you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean, even you talk about our dad, he broke some of those same generational things. Like our grandpa, kind of towards the end of his life, was, well, even when my dad was kind of younger, he was really nutty. And like one time, he's dead now, so he's not gonna hear this podcast. But one time he just was like up and like was like, I'm going to California, and he just like left. And he had like 2 kids still at home. I think our dad was out of the house, but he just like left. And I think he took the washing machine and the dryer and left. Just loaded up into like a school bus that he had bought and just drove to California. And his dad did the same thing. Our great grandpa had done the same thing. He would just like disappear for like 6 months and just be like, I don't like the weather here. I'm going to go to California for a couple months and just like eat beans out of a can in the middle of the desert. And so it's just kind of like our dad never did that. He was around. He was very involved in our lives. He was at every single one of our soccer games. He was at every one of our lacrosse games. He was supporting us. He was at our scouting activities. He took us camping. He was a steady income. He had a steady income. We didn't want for really anything. And so that is a new legacy that he brought to the table, where he set the standard. So in my eyes, like it's, that's the bar has been set. Like me not being able to provide for my family or just like leaving my family, that's not even something I can even imagine doing.
Yeah.
That's not even that's not even the card that's on the table for me. And so I think that, and I'm trying to improve upon that. And that's the cycle. And I think if we can admit that as human beings, that we're not perfect, but hopefully our children can improve on these things, then and I brought us so far, and hopefully they can continue to carry the torch even further. I think that's a great mentality to have, because then it really will take away some of that judgment that I think is often, unfortunately, very common amongst grandparents, just
Yeah.
generally in the world right now. I mean, you get on social media and you type in "boomer," and you'll see it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I think it's very important what you said in that I hope that my children and their spouses give me some grace when I get to that point, because nobody is saying that I did everything right and that I'm doing everything right or that I will do everything right. But I think it just comes down to love and a desire to kind of what you said, Jared, is not so much always like, hey, I want to be with my family forever, but it's like, yeah, that'd be awesome, but I want to be with my family right now
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah,
And making that happen. So, yeah, this
yeah,
has been great.
yeah. And then one other thing that you mentioned, like building those memories by spending individual one-on-one time. I think some of my one of some of my greatest memories are spending a one-on-one time with our grandfathers and my grandfather. One time my grandpa came down to North Carolina, and we went to like the speedway, the racetrack, and they were having a big outdoor like yard sale kind of thing for all these antique cars, and he was looking for some headlights for his like 1959 Cadillac or whatever it was, and we would just walked around all day. He bought me lunch, and I mean, we still talk about that to this day, just how fun that was. think I was 16, 17 when we did that, and that was just a great one-on-one thing. There's a guy at jiu-jitsu that brings his grandson, every a couple classes a week to the little kid. He's like 5 years old, to the little kids class, and just so spending that one-on-one time is critical. That bonding time, and that builds those memories, and it makes those relationships even more solid when you do that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully when we get there, I guess we got a little bit of time to figure it out, but maybe it's one of those things you kind of set some standards and say, this is how I want to do things. And then, what does Mike Tyson say? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, I think for in some situations, it's almost good to like say these things now that we're in the throes of having all these kids and stuff. Like, man, I wish I'm going to be this type of grandparent, so that when that day comes, we will have maybe a record of what we said, and we'll say, oh, that's what I should be doing, because maybe we'll forget when we get to be old and curmudgeon-y. We'll be like, oh man, these freaking parents these days can't handle their kids. And it's like, if we think back, or maybe listen back to this episode, like, hey, it's a lot. You forget how much it was, or how stressful it could be, and how just a weekend or an evening out with the wife can just be the respite that you need, or the various other things we've talked about. So,
yeah.
well, excellent. Well, this was this was the last stage of fatherhood. I think we might do one more special episode that might be still in the works. We'll keep you in touch about that around this fatherhood topic. But it's been great. I think we've covered some great ideas along all the stages, and maybe we can look back and when we reach these different stages, and we can expound on especially these last three, as we haven't gone through these yet.
Yeah, for sure. So let's, we're just trying to figure this out just along with everybody else. We've never claimed to be experts in everything that we talk about. That's kind of the birth of the podcast is, hey, we need to make sure that we're on the right path and building our own personal creeds to kind of, mirror who we want to be. And so I think these types of conversations will definitely be a step in the right direction for you, Jared, and for me, and then also listening, man and woman, right? I think we can all learn from this. So
Absolutely.
let's take this and let's build that creed together.
Let's do it.